Hey everyone, welcome back to Stadium Stats. Today we'll be looking at week 6 of the NFL, going into my schedule predictions as well as my power rankings. So without further ado, let's get into it. Starting off on Thursday Night Football, we have a divisional matchup between the San Francisco 49ers and the Seattle Seahawks. The Seahawks and the 49ers are both coming off pretty bad losses, in which they lost in the final moments of those games, as the 49ers led up a touchdown to the Cardinals as well as a 2-point conversion after being up 13 and ended up being down 24-23, and then they went for it and threw an interception on the supposed to be game-winning drive, and didn't end up winning that game. The Seahawks, on the other hand, got lost to the Giants as they were losing most of that game, but then as they were going to kick the game-tying field goal, it got blocked and returned for a touchdown by the Giants. Both of these teams had a heartbreaking loss here. The Niners are 2-3, Seahawks are 3-2 after starting 3-0. And realistically, this game could go either way. Neither team has proven to be an unstoppable force this season, as the Seahawks looked really good through the first few weeks, but then have calmed down, and the 49ers looked really good in week 1, and again in week 4, but haven't won a game in weeks 2, 3, or 5, and have honestly looked a lot worse than they have in the past, especially compared to last year, where they made it to the Super Bowl. A lot of people were saying this was their last big shot at winning a Super Bowl, and it's not looking very good currently, but the Niners are known for their slow starts, so maybe things will change. I am going to pick the 49ers. I don't think they're going to lose all 3 of their first divisional matchups. I think they will beat the Seahawks in this divisional matchup, as currently 2 of their 3 losses are 2 divisional matchups in the Rams and the Cardinals, but I don't think that will continue. I'm going to say the 49ers rebound, because they are more talented than the Seahawks. On paper, at least. Up next, on Sunday morning, we've got a game in London between the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Chicago Bears. The Bears are sitting at 3-2, coming off back-to-back wins. They're 3-0 at home, although they're considered to be home in London, but they are not the home team as they are playing in London. And the Jaguars also coming off a win over a division rival in the Colts. It's their first win of the season. They looked a lot better in that game. Well, at least offensively. Offensively, they looked really good. They were putting up a lot of points. Trevor Lawrence was playing well. Tank Bigsby looked great. Travis Etienne kind of getting phased a little bit out of that offense. Brian Thomas Jr. looked fantastic as that wide receiver 1 for that offense. But their defense let up a ton of points. They let up over 30 points to the Colts, and the Colts had a backup quarterback in. Joe Flacco is not their starter, and he was still able to put up 30-plus points on the Jaguars' defense. The Bears look decent. Caleb Williams has been improving every week. They destroyed the Panthers last week, although the Panthers aren't a very good team, but it was a big win over them. And it was the biggest loss Andy Dalton's faced under the Panthers so far this season. So it was pretty impressive. Caleb Williams has improved every single game. His passer rating's gone up. His passing yards have surpassed 300 again. He's just looking really, really good and really showing improvements and flashes. I am going to pick the Bears. I think they are a better team, especially defensively. The Bears have a really good defense, and the Jaguars do not. So I'm going to pick the Bears to win this one. But if the Jaguars' offense looks how it did last week and the Bears doesn't, I wouldn't be surprised if this was able to go in the Jags' favor. However, I think the Jags are a worse team. Defensively, they're worse, and offensively, they're less consistent. Up next, noon on Sunday, we've got a matchup between the Commanders and the Ravens. And before the season, had you told me this would have been as good of a game as it's supposed to be, I don't think most people would have believed you. But the Commanders have looked excellent. They're 4-1. Jaden Daniels keeps putting up over 30 points. Their offense just cannot be stopped, and their defense actually looked great. Yeah, they were facing the Browns. The Browns are not a good team, but they looked fantastic against the Browns. Their defense had 7 sacks. They had an interception. They played amazing football. and that was their best defensive performance of the season. Their offense, as I said, has looked continuously good throughout the whole season. The Ravens, on the other hand, coming off a crazy game against the Bengals in which they were down by 2 scores with very little time left and ended up winning that game in overtime because the Bengals missed a field goal that was not a guarantee because their kick holder misplaced the ball and they missed the game-winning field goal in overtime. And then the Ravens got the ball back. Derrick Henry had a huge rush down within the red zone, and then they kicked the game-winning field goal and won the game. The Ravens are a better team than the Commanders, I think. But it's really hard to say because the Commanders have a better record. The Commanders have been playing more consistently, but the Ravens, on paper, have the better team. They have consistently, with the exception of the last game, had a better defense than the Commanders. And so that's what makes this one really complicated, is because the Commanders' defense has looked really not that great through weeks 1 through 4, and then looked fantastic in week 5. And the Ravens kind of did the opposite. Their defense wasn't the problem in weeks 1 through 4, but their defense was a problem in week 5. And while they did win that game, their defense almost cost them that game, as Joe Burrow threw for 5 touchdowns, just had an unbelievable game, and it was both teams scored within the upper 30s in points. So I am going to pick the Ravens, but of all games to be an upset, I really would not be surprised if the Commanders could pull this off. I just don't think Jaden Daniels is going to have as much success against a provenly good defense like the Ravens have had. Up next, we've got a matchup between the Cardinals and the Packers. Cardinals coming off a big win over the 49ers in which they came back to win right at the end of the game. They were down 13. Marvin Harrison caught a ball on 4th down on that game-winning drive to keep the drive alive. And then James Conner played a really good game. Kyler Murray played a really good game. Had a 50-yard rushing touchdown to start the game. And all in all, the Cardinals look like a much improved team. Their defense had 2 interceptions on Brock Purdy and honestly looked much improved. The Cardinals are a pretty decent team. The Packers, on the other hand, they started off pretty rough and were pretty inconsistent throughout the whole game against the Rams. Jordan Love threw his first career pick 6, and the Rams really were in the game the entire time, despite being a very beat-up and injured team. But the Packers did end up coming away with the win after all of it, and do still look like a good team, but that game really didn't show it. Their defense, though, has been excellent. Xavier McKinney has 5 interceptions in 5 weeks, 1 each week, which is unbelievable. First player to do that with a new team ever in NFL history. And really, as I keep saying, the Packers are the better team on paper here. Cardinals have more momentum going into this game, and that could mean something, but I do think the Packers are the better team. But I'm actually going to pick the Cardinals to win this one, because I think the Cardinals are a better team than the Rams, who the Packers really did struggle against. And they're in the same division. The Rams and Cardinals played, and the Cardinals demolished the Rams. And while it's not a one-to-one comparison in the NFL, because any given Sunday things can be different, the Packers really did struggle against the Rams, and I think the Cardinals might be more for them to handle. So I'm going to actually go with the Cardinals on this one. Up next, we've got a divisional matchup between the Colts and the Titans. Titans coming off a bye week. They've been pretty bad this year, but they're no longer winless, as they did get that win over the Dolphins in week 4 and then went on bye. The Colts suffered a loss to the Jacksonville Jaguars in a game in which they scored over 30 points. Their offense did everything it could, but even without Jonathan Taylor playing, and also without Anthony Richardson playing. And yet they still lost that game because their defense is really, really bad. The Colts are a better team than the Titans. The Titans are one of the worst teams in the league. They really can't get anything going on offense, and while their defense is really good, their offense just isn't doing anything. Will Levis is really not playing very well and is probably holding that team back. The Colts, though, their offense is doing a lot, and their defense can't do anything. So I do think this will be a pretty interesting matchup, but the Colts are a better team, both on paper and in practice. They have been playing better, and I'm going to pick the Colts to win this one. Up next, we've got a matchup between the Texans and the Patriots. The Texans are coming off a big win over the Buffalo Bills in a game in which their defense made Josh Allen look not great. He really didn't look good. He struggled to get passing yards in that game. He struggled to get any passing game going. And yes, he was missing his top target, Khalil Shakir, but that shouldn't have changed the game as much as it seemed to on offense, and they shouldn't have struggled as much as they did. So I'm going to give a lot of that to the Texans defense for playing really well. Their offense, unfortunately losing Nico Collins to a hamstring injury, but he did score a 70-yard touchdown before going out, and Stephon Diggs and Tank Dell stepped up a bit in his absence. The Patriots, they are certainly a team that exists in the NFL. They really haven't been playing well at all. Some might argue they are the worst team in the NFL. And I think last week showed that just as well as the week before against the 49ers, as playing against the Dolphins. The Dolphins, keep in mind, have not been a good team, especially without Tua, and yet the Patriots still lost. They lost to a team that also only had one win in their division and still couldn't really get much going against a bad offense and a bad defense in the Miami Dolphins. The Patriots are seriously one of the worst teams in the entire league, and therefore I'm going to pick the Texans to win this one. And I don't think it'll be close either. Up next, we've got a matchup between the Browns and the Eagles. The Eagles, coming off a bye week, much needed after their brutal loss to the Buccaneers in Week 4, in which they lost by double digits as they got their points doubled by the Buccaneers. The Eagles have been really inconsistent this season. One week they're really good, the next week they're not. One week their offense is good, the next week they're not. One week their defense is good, the next week they're not. And there's just no consistency with this team, and it's really hard to say how far they can go and what teams they can beat when they're playing this inconsistently. Luckily for them, they're playing another one of the really bad teams in the NFL, as the Browns have one win. They have been really bad. They got demolished by the Commanders, and I really don't see much hope for the Browns. Deshaun Watson's not playing well. That defense is playing okay, but that offense just can't get anything going. I am going to pick the Eagles to win this one. I wouldn't be surprised if they still struggled, because some games they just seem to for seemingly no reason. But I am going to pick the Eagles to win this one over a bad Browns team. Up next, we've got another divisional matchup during the 3 o'clock window this time between the Chargers and the Broncos. The Chargers coming off a bye week in which they also kind of needed it. They were really injured going into the bye week. Hopefully they healed up a little bit during the bye week and have a chance against the Broncos this time. The Broncos had a brutal win over the Raiders in which they destroyed them. The Raiders couldn't get anything going on offense. They started off with a 65-yard touchdown to Brock Bowers and then scored a field goal and couldn't do anything the rest of the game. And the Broncos put up over 30. So they had a really impressive performance. Bo Nix looked pretty good. Javonte Williams got that run game going. And their defense just looks unbelievable. They had an 100-yard pick six, Pat Surtain did, and he had another interception. Just a really impressive performance by Pat Surtain and that defense. I don't know if the Broncos are good or not. They're on a 3-game win streak, but I think the Chargers are better. And I am going to pick the Chargers in this one, but I think this will be a very close matchup. These teams typically play pretty close as it is a divisional matchup. The Chargers, they have more consistency on offense, and while their defense isn't quite as good as the Broncos, it's still a really good unit, and they have amazing coaching under Jim Harbaugh, and he's just really shown to have made a huge improvement to this team. That run game looks fantastic, and so for those reasons, I am going to pick the Chargers in what I think will be a very close matchup, but I think the Chargers win. Up next, we've got a matchup between the Steelers and the Raiders. The Steelers coming off a loss on Sunday Night Football in a game that got delayed heavily and ended up getting played after a huge thunderstorm, but it started really late. And while the Steelers were up most of the game, they did end up losing basically on the final drive of the game as Dak Prescott threw a touchdown to Jalen Tolbert to take the lead with like 30 seconds left. The Steelers looked decent. Their defense looked fantastic, which seems to be the case most weeks. As Dak Prescott threw 2 interceptions, he also fumbled. They forced another fumble, which did actually get recovered by Dallas, but they did force 2 fumbles and 2 interceptions. Their offense, though, couldn't really get much going. Justin Fields did struggle a little more than he has through the first 4 weeks, and it was a little harder to watch on offense. George Pickens really couldn't get anything going. Their rushing offense wasn't effective, and it wasn't efficient, and their passing offense just couldn't get going. The Raiders struggled even more on offense, and they struggled on defense, as they let up 30 points to the Broncos. They played terrible on offense for most of the game. Again, Brock Bowers had that really good 65-yard touchdown right at the beginning of the game and then couldn't do anything after that. Brock Bowers was actually the only good part of that offense throughout that whole game. Jacoby Myers played okay, and they even had to bench Gardner Minshew because of how bad he was playing and put in Aiden O'Connell, who really didn't play much better. He also had a turnover. The Raiders have been struggling a lot. The Steelers, defensively, I think are going to be too much for the Raiders' offense to handle, and therefore I'm going to pick the Steelers to win this one. Up next, we've got a divisional matchup between the Falcons and the Panthers. The Panthers got destroyed by the Bears. They couldn't get anything going on offense. They let up over 30 points to the Bears on defense to a rookie quarterback. They really looked pretty bad in that game. Back to their weeks 1 and 2 forms under Bryce Young. Bryce Young even got put into this game because Andy Dalton wasn't playing well, and so they benched him for Bryce Young. Falcons, on the other hand, had an amazing win over the Buccaneers in a just heart-pounding game the entire time. It was back and forth. It was unbelievable. Arguably one of the games of the year, if not the game of the year so far. And ended up coming away with a huge win. Kirk Cousins threw for over 500 yards, and their passing offense looked amazing. Drake London and Darnell Mooney both passed 100 yards. Kyle Pitts also had 80 of his own, and that pass offense just looked exceptional in that game. The Falcons' defense couldn't stop much of what the Buccaneers were doing, at least in the first half, but they really did hold them a lot better in the second half. Yes, they still scored points, but they didn't put up too many yards, and it was a lot more impressive of a performance by their defense in that second half. They ended up winning that game, though, and I think they'll win this one, too, against a really bad Panthers team, so I'm going to pick the Falcons to win this one. Up next, we've got a matchup between the Lions and the Cowboys. The Lions took on the bye week last week, and they didn't need it too badly. It's honestly kind of a disappointment for them that they have to get their bye week out of the way this early, but they had their bye week after an amazing win over the Seattle Seahawks on Monday Night Football 2 weeks ago, and they played amazing. Their offense looked unstoppable. Jared Goff had a perfect passer rating. He threw for 100% completion rate. He even caught a touchdown from Amon-Ra St. Brown, who also had a 100% completion rate. And it was just an unbelievable performance by this team, who just looked unstoppable on offense. And their defense really couldn't stop all that much, as Geno Smith looked great and Kenneth Walker also looked great. Actually, Kenneth Walker looked fantastic, but their defense still played better than the Seahawks defense and did enough to get that win in a game where their offense just took over. The Cowboys, they just had a really rough game on Sunday Night Football against the Steelers. But they did come away with a win, which is what matters. At this point in the season, you're stacking wins. That's what really matters. And the Cowboys are 3-2. They're a pretty good team, but I don't think they're as good as the Lions. Defensively, they're probably a little bit better, but they're not consistent either. And their offense doesn't have the same explosive power that the Lions does. And for those reasons, I'm going to pick the Lions to win this one. I do think this will be a close game, as both of these teams are pretty good, but the Lions are a Super Bowl contender, and I really don't see Dallas as that. They've been pretty good, but they're inconsistent, and while they did take out a 3-1 Steelers team that has been really good this season, and they did come back in that game against the Ravens, and they have won a few other games, they have not played with consistency this season. And for that reason, I'm going to pick the Lions. Up next, on Sunday Night Football, we've got a matchup between the Bengals and the Giants. The Bengals falling to 1-4 after somehow not winning that game. Again, missing that field goal that would have given them the game in overtime during a next score wins situation. And they missed it, gave the ball over to the Ravens, who then ran the ball down their throat with Derrick Henry and won the game. Joe Burrow looked fantastic, though, in this game. He threw for 5 touchdowns. Jamar Chase looked fantastic. He had almost 200 yards and 2 touchdowns. T. Higgins looked great. The run game looked decent. And their offense was not the problem at all. But their defense cannot stop anything. And that's been a problem week in and week out this season. And so for that reason, the Bengals are not contenders this year. Until they can fix their defense, and Joe Burrow said it himself, they are not contenders. The Giants are also not contenders, but they just took down the Seattle Seahawks in a game in which they were expected to lose. Daniel Jones has now thrown 6 touchdowns to 1 interception in his last 4 games and has looked a lot better. Malik Nabers wasn't even playing in that game, nor was Devin Singletary, and then they found a rookie running back that they had drafted in the 5th round to play fantastic, and Wan'Dale Robinson and Darius Slayton stepped up in the receiving game, and they looked really good. They even won off a blocked field goal returned for a touchdown, and so their special teams even looked good. The Giants, I really don't think will beat the Bengals. I think the Bengals' offense is going to be too much for the Giants' defense, but the Giants' defense is pretty decent, and their offense has been playing above standard for them. So I am not going to be surprised if the Giants put up a fight, but I'm going to pick the Bengals to win this one in what I think will be a pretty competitive game where the Bengals' offense will just be too much for the Giants to handle. Next, on Monday Night Football, we've got a matchup between the Bills and the Jets. The Bills coming off a brutal loss to the Texans, in which they lost by 3, but their offense just couldn't get anything going most of that game. Their offense was really struggling. Khalil Shakir didn't play, but that shouldn't have made as much of a difference as it seemed to for this team, as their offense looked unstoppable weeks 1 through 3, and then they lost back-to-back games, including one where their offense looked really bad, and the other one where their defense looked really bad. The Jets, on the other hand, they got a lot of problems. Aaron Rodgers threw 3 interceptions against the Vikings, and yes, the Vikings are undefeated. Yes, the Vikings are a really good team, but they were trailing that entire game and couldn't put anything together. Aaron Rodgers really struggled. That defense played pretty well considering they were facing the Vikings, but the Vikings still won that game pretty decisively. So I don't really know what that says about the Jets' offense or defense, because they've been playing super inconsistent this season. Week 1, they lost to the Niners. Then they really bounced back in week 2 and 3, and then dropped 2 in a row to the Broncos and the Vikings. But I do think the Bills are a better team, but I do think this will also give Aaron Rodgers a chance for a bounce-back game. Divisional matchups tend to be really close. They're on primetime, where Rodgers tends to play better, and I just think his connection with Garrett Wilson has really developed, especially after seeing how well Garrett played in that last game. But a lot of that was volume, so it's really hard to say, but I am going to say the Jets improve, but it's not enough to take down the Bills, so I'm going to pick the Bills to win this one. And our final matchup, sorry, I know I went out of order because this is also a Sunday game, but I had to record at different times. So our final matchup that we'll be discussing, as I wanted to hold off until after Monday Night Football, will be the Buccaneers taking on the Saints in another divisional matchup. The Buccaneers coming off a brutal loss to the Falcons, as they really were in that game the whole time. They looked more dominant the whole time and were leading most of that game, and then ended up losing because Kirk Cousins and that offense was just too much for the Buccaneers defense to handle, as Kirk Cousins threw for over 500 yards and they scored 36 points. Yes, the game went to overtime, But I don't think the Buccaneers performed very well in overtime, as the Falcons were able to just run down the field and score immediately on their first drive and win the game. Yeah, the Buccaneers didn't get a chance on offense, and their offense is what had been playing really well the whole night. So I do think the game could have gone a lot differently had the Buccaneers gotten the ball first, but there's no way to know. So the Buccaneers defense is what cost them that game. The Saints, on the other hand, played the Chiefs on Monday Night Football in a game in which Patrick Mahomes played really well. Despite his one interception, he did play really well. The stats look worse than it really was because he was leading that offense the whole game. They were in control of that game the entire time. They had much higher time of possession. Kareem Hunt looked amazing on the ground. Patrick Mahomes threw for a ton of yards, and the interception was due to a bobbled pass. And Juju Smith-Schuster, despite that bobbled pass, still had a really good game. Same with Travis Kelce. So that offense actually looked really good. That defense also looked really good. They were able to hold the Saints to only 13 points, and 6 of those came from a defensive touchdown. So the only points the Saints scored on offense was from one big Rashid Shaheed play. Chris Olave was held to almost nothing, and the Saints defense just kept getting absolutely destroyed by both the Chiefs' run and pass game. So for this game, I'm going to pick the Buccaneers to win over the Saints because I do think the Buccaneers are currently a better team. The Saints are really going through a down spiral, and I just don't see them winning this game, and the Buccaneers are going to be pissed off after their last loss, and I really do think that they're going to come back with a vengeance, especially in their division. Now I'm going to be going into my top 5 list for the week, and yeah, I'm only doing top 5 this week. There's really just not enough good teams for me to decide from, so I decided to just do 5 this week. And it is basically excluding the teams that were on bye. That's not going to necessarily stay consistent week to week, but for this week, I'm not going to include them because I really don't think any of them can beat out the top 5 as of now. At number 5, I've got the Texans. They look really good. The only thing that's holding me back is that Nico Collins got hurt, and they have won only in 1-score games. Both of those are a little concerning. However, I do think they're still a really, really good team. CJ Stroud looks great. That passing game looks great. Joe Mixon should be coming back soon. And that defense looks really good. So for that reason, they're at 5. At 4, I've got the Commanders. Jaden Daniels looks unbelievable, especially for a rookie. He's just playing out of his mind. Controlling that offense. They keep scoring over 30 points. They're not punting very often. Just unbelievable performance on offense. And while their defense has been bad most of the season, last game they had 7 sacks. So really good performance by them. At number 3, I've got the Ravens. They've really bounced back after starting 0-2. They demolished the Bills. They also just played a really, really good game against the Bengals, at least offensively. Defensively, they've got some struggles as they let up 38 points to the Bengals in a really rough game for them defensively. Jamar Chase kept torching their defense, but typically their defense is pretty good, and their offense is really clicking right now. At number 2, I've got the Chiefs. They look really good. They look pretty unstoppable. They're 5-0. They haven't lost a game. And Patrick Mahomes is playing pretty well after having a somewhat rough start. Yeah, he is tied for the most interceptions in the league. However, some of those have been bobbled passes, and he's made up for it in the amount of yards he's been passing for. Plus, his receiving core has been really destroyed, and yet he's been able to make something out of nothing. So that offense is working. Kareem Hunt really replacing Isaiah Pacheco really well. So pretty good performance by them on offense. And defensively, they're just stopping everybody. Their run defense is amazing. Their pass defense is amazing. They've got
very few holes on that defense. And at number one, I've got the Minnesota Vikings, who on paper are not as talented as the Chiefs, but they've been playing more decisively. They've been playing with bigger wins, and they've been beating better teams. And for those reasons, I'm choosing the Vikings over the Chiefs. Their offense has had some struggles. Aaron Jones also did just get hurt, but they're pushing through. Ty Chandler will take over there, and their passing offense has looked great with Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. Sam Darnold did have some struggles against the Jets, but he had been playing really well before that, and their defense is the best in the entire league. Andrew Van Ginkel has 2 pick sixes on the season in 5 weeks. They've just been holding teams to very few points and having an all-around unbelievable defense, getting a ton of sacks, and just really impressive. And for that reason, they're in at number 1. Thank you guys so much for listening and tuning in. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and tune in on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And with that, I'll see you guys next time. Peace.